Low-altitude clouds are obscuring the Finger Lakes region hillsides here in Watkins Glen, New York, but there's still a little bit of sky blue in the form of paint on the Armco here at Watkins Glen International. A sight to behold here this morning, Greg. At least we've got that. It is a cool and drizzly morning, but it is time for GRIDLIFE at the Glen. Day number 2, track battle qualifying 2.
I love your optimism and finding that little bit. It is a gloomy day. That's the only way to put it. It's really chilly. It's wet. And we are going to have time attack track battle going out on track, the second qualifying run of the NOS Energy Track Battle Championship for GRIDLIFE. And it's not like there's not incentive. You know, yesterday's session was dry, it was faster, so nobody's probably going to be bettering times unless they had a real issue. But there is incentive out there. One, GRIDLIFE does track wet track records, and also just driving this track, whatever the conditions. This is the Glen. This is special.
GRIDLIFE Live is powered by Hyundai N. Hyundai N, Never Just Drive, and Falcon, the official tire of GRIDLIFE Track Battle. Looks like a hardship lap there for, I think that's the number 72. That's Scott Heckert in GLTC. But there are cars on track right now, and that is the Falcon Sunday Cup category for the NOS Energy Track Battle Championship qualifying 2. Goal is to be top 5 at the end of our 3 qualifying sessions to get yourself into the podium sprint. Yesterday, this group had a pretty dry racetrack, so they're probably not going to go faster, Greg, but that doesn't mean they're not going to try.
Exactly, and like we said, you do track wet track records. You know, it isn't a point like the dry is, but it's still an incentive, something to chase to say, yeah, I got the record of the record of the wet. And to me, you're fast in the wet. That says an awful lot about your driving skills, your car control, your talent, your feel for a racetrack. So there is incentive here, and as we said, just an opportunity to get out and drive this track. But it is definitely wet, and so you've got to be mindful of that. You've got to learn where that rain line is, which is often off of the normal race line, and it takes a little bit, right? It takes a little bit of mental adjustment to come into a corner and say, yeah, I'm not diving to the apex like I should. I'm going to stay out. I'm going to rim shot around a corner, because now you got a lot less margin, right, as you're running around the corner, but that's where the grip is. And once you find it, you can really enjoy yourself in these wet sessions.
Yeah, and honestly, there's a lot of drivers that love driving in the wet, and you don't really get a chance to drive in the wet a lot in the NOS Energy Track Battle Championship, or you didn't in the past, because all the goal was, hey, we're going to break a track record. If it's wet, I can't break the track record. I can only get a wet record. It's not really worth it, so drivers didn't drive in the wet in the past a lot. Now you're going to have to if you're in the podium sprint. So this is not only qualifying, but it's also practice in a way.
Right, and if that top 5 yesterday in the podium sprint, if a couple of the guys at the back were having some issues, like in the smaller classes, you can get out, put in a really good lap in the wet. Maybe just by a little you can sneak in there. And for anybody who's in that top 5 from yesterday, I'd be out in this session in anger, because odds are today, looking at the forecast, we could very well be running that podium sprint for the first time in the wet. And that's, the single car 2-lap sessions. That's going to be really impressive, and you need track knowledge if you're going to be at the front.
You certainly do. And again, this morning it's relatively cool outside, mid-50s, and kind of drizzly. It's not really raining, but it's drizzling, and the track is certainly very wet. So there are some standing puddles, as you can see here in the inner loop, and just some general challenges to going fast around here. It was slippery yesterday, but this is less of a mixed condition. This is a true wet racetrack, and that's different. You have a little bit more confidence when you know the track is completely wet versus yesterday when it was kind of this in-between mixing conditions, and that was pretty treacherous, and we saw some big slips and slides yesterday, especially on any painted surface, Greg. Way less grip than the asphalt.
Absolutely. Those curbs in the wet, stay off them. I mean, that's just the general piece of advice. And you're right. When it's that sort of, just damp, area, then the track can feel really greasy and slippery, and it's unpredictable. Here, okay, it's wet, like you said, but this is why you want to get out. If you go out in that podium sprint and you go hustling into the bus stop and you come across that big puddle there because you didn't go out in the wet runs earlier, that's going to be a big problem for you. So this is when you go out, and you better right now in your first few laps, don't push it. Drive around and make mental notes. Okay, big puddle at the exit of the bus stop. There's sometimes in the S's there's a little rivulet of water that comes down. So be a little straighter through that section. Don't be leaning on the car as much. All the little tricks you have to do to keep the car smooth, thus fast in the wet.
So Sunday Cup cars working their way around track right now. It'll take them a little while. It takes them a while in the dry, too. But as they head around, we're going to start to see lap times trip up on the timing and scoring. And remember that the stacker is going to show you only the driver's best lap of the weekend, and will only change if they improve, which we're probably unlikely to see here. But we'll get an idea again of who is in the top 5 coming into this session and who has some work to do, and maybe get up on that wheel and try to improve on their lap from yesterday. Especially if you didn't really get a representative lap, you might actually be able to find a little bit more speed if you only were doing a 60% or so effort lap yesterday.
Or you had some sort of an issue or whatever. Absolutely. I mean, there is motivation here. Michael Smith just came through fastest lap, and this tells you how wet it is for an out lap, 3:05. So way off the pace. That's going to get a lot better here as they get little heat in the tires. And we've talked about this before. What makes a rain tire work isn't just the sipes or the grooves in the tire that channels the water out so you don't hydroplane and get up on top of the layer of moisture, but you still have to generate heat in the tire. That's what still gives you grip in the wet, and that's why rain tires tend to be very soft compounds, and you still got to get a little bit of heat in the tire. So in a couple of laps, and you talked about it, it's low 50s out there, so it's chilly, so it's going to take a little while for these guys, 1, to get the heat in the tires, 2, to figure out that line, where to avoid certain little spots of puddling, and then 3, be, all right, now I'm willing to get after it. Now, the one fun thing about Sunday Cup, most of these cars are front drive, and front drive cars in the rain can be fun because you just sort of put an ice racing setup on it and go.
Yep, and you smash that throttle to the floor if you get a little bit sideways. And again, there's Michael Ross Smith, currently 3rd in the advancing group, and again, we'd expect him to move on just like he did at Carolina Motorsports Park. And Dietland in the 488 car, currently the quickest here in this session with a 3:05.29, and that is a good 30 seconds off of the times from yesterday. So, Again, I don't really expect anyone to go quicker. And this is the challenge of this format. We had the reverse scenario at Carolina Motorsports Park where I think there was Q2 was quick, but Q3 had rain. So you had 2 good sessions. Now we're only going to have the 1.
Yeah.
So yesterday becomes very, very important. And all of that is shaping up for our podium sprint later today, which will be in similar conditions probably to this.
Well, and that's where, we've talked about it not only for this but for the Touring Cup. You've got to look big picture, and that includes paying attention to what the weather's going to be, what the forecast is, looking at it going, it was very clear that yesterday was probably going to be the drier of the 2 days. So if you had a dry track, go out, put in a time, do whatever you could to put a flyer in, because that could be the one that ultimately advanced you. And a number of drivers paid pretty close attention to that. And you feel for the guys like Novelli, at a 2:34, Rodriguez at a 2:37. It's not far off where those top 5 were. They're not going to get a real shot at bettering that today. So that's where it's a little difficult. But, again, for those top 5, you definitely want to be out there right now, and it looks like most of them are at this stage to get a feel for this track in the wet.
Yeah, the one driver I was looking at, that dilly-dally team, the 313, I had to imagine that was a course cut, but it didn't get deleted yesterday. But I'm just checking in on Sunday Cup, and it does look like the fastest time was the 2:29.441 by Jacob Abbott. So that dilly-dally time is not a legal time, which would shift that cut line. And oh no, there's trouble out of turn 10, and that is a Mazda 2 that has found its way into the wall at the exit of turn 10, and that is a big hit over there, Greg.
Yeah, that's substantial. And as you called it, probably came out of turn 10, ran wide up on those curbs. And if you get on those curbs, you talked about how wet they are. Plus, you can see there's the really, really gator teeth part, and then there's the back side of it. And if you straddle that and try and turn back over, it'll hook the car, and then you don't know what happens. Your best bet is just to straighten the wheel out, ride it out. And my guess is that he got up on those curbs, tried to turn back a little bit, and it just snapped around on him. So I'm pretty sure we're going to see this session stop because that is an impact zone.
Yeah, that's Daniel Malloy in the 801 that has crashed pretty heavily at the exit of turn number 10. The front end of that thing shortened up pretty well, unfortunately. And again, that's one of the trouble spots. That and turn 1 are the other spot where you get wide up onto the painted rumble strips. And we saw this with Cal Fortner yesterday.
Yes.
You get up on the curbs, and you're going to spin to that inside and get that wall. And there's tire bundles there. Cal missed them. Thankfully, that was only minor damage, but this certainly a little bit more than that.
Yeah, that was a substantial hit, and that's really, really unfortunate. But that's part and parcel of being in the wet here, and you've got to be prepared for that.
Oh, another one.
This is 488 of Matt Dietland.
Yeah, he's qualified into the podium sprint as is.
Yeah.
So this is a big deal also. Same area. This is entering turn 11. And he's got damage to the left rear corner and the left front. Although this doesn't look quite as significant as the other one. I wonder if he was coming through and saw the car on the left and went wide and maybe got on the same painted curb. And he must have hit drivers right, I'd have to imagine.
Where he's parked, you would think so. That's a real shame. So they're checkering the session early.
Yep. That's
a smart call. And, what that does, obviously, to get these cars removed and the like take far longer than the end of the session would be. Checker it. That allows you to get the EV vehicles out there and get those guys cleared off the track and back into their paddock spaces.
Yep, and that's not a good start to the day, Greg. Two cars in one session, but again, this is the treachery of Watkins Glen in the rain is not necessarily the pavement. It's everything that's painted.
Yes.
And we saw how slippery it was yesterday. Just the second you touch any line, any rumble strip, any curb, it's just ice completely.
Yeah, and that's any track, obviously. Any track that you're on. My home track was Brainerd International, which, of course, the front straight when we ran the old long 3-mile track was a drag strip. And there were the painted boxes. And in the wet, man, you did anything you could to drive right down the center of the track and avoid those, because even in a low horsepower car, you'd spin the wheels up and go skating off. So you've just got to be very attuned to that. And the other thing is, if you don't know much about rain driving, you haven't done a lot of it, watch some YouTube videos. There are people out there, wander the paddock and talk to the guys that know it. There are a lot of really talented drivers in this paddock. Go ask them, when it's wet out, what's the line to drive? Because you don't drive the normal line, because that's oftentimes the slipperiest part of it.
Yeah, so let's have a look at the Hyundai N track preview, give you an idea of the trouble spots around here at Watkins Glen International. First, we got to go over the brief history of this racetrack, built in 1956, but the original course, 1948 to 1952, downtown Watkins Glen, 6.6-mile course. Talk about treacherous, Greg. This was it.
Oh, absolutely. Start-finish line right in the town, but at the top of the track up there, you literally went across a stone bridge with a cliff on the right and a cliff wall on the left. It was crazy. Then they built that the original Grand Prix track, and then I think it was 1971 when they added the boot, which is the track that they run now.
Then the Interloop 1992, that was the last edition. So turn 1, trouble spot. This is where we've seen some drivers have issues. You see the yellow and red painted curb. You get wide up on that, you can spin down to the inside. Turns 2, 3, and 4 up through the S's. That's a single groove corner set, right? GLTC, we saw some side-by-side. Treacherous up there. The blue bushes get really tight up the top of the hill. Then the run down to the Interloop. This spot, the track opens up a little bit in terms of the walls and things, but you got those curbs that put you offline. Turn 5, then turn 6, the downhill, the laces. That's a tricky corner. The track falls away as you go down the hill, and then there's no runoff anywhere down here. Turn 7. You get to turn 8, a little bit of runoff, but that's not a troublesome corner. Turn 9, 10, and 11, though, things get challenging.
Well, 9 is probably the trickiest corner here because you are climbing up. It's a blind turn-in. You don't see the apex, let alone your track out. And as you commit to the corner and you turn in, it flattens out because that's where the connector is for the NASCAR track. And it gets flat, which means it goes off camber suddenly. And if you turn in too early, that barrier is right at the exit of the track, like it is at turn 11. And, the other place that you have to think about, you talked about as you enter the inner loop, it opens up. But as you exit that, if you get crossed up or mess up at the exit of that, you can go straight off into that blue bush, as you like to call it, on the outside of the track. So this is a track. It's a glorious road course, but most of this track, you have to drive it with immense precision.
And precision and aggression. We talked yesterday,
yes.
and this is more a situation for the dry, obviously. But Watkins Glen rewards you for driving hard, driving accurately, but driving very hard. The bus stop in particular, that inner loop, those curbs there are 2 car widths wide.
Yes.
And you can use it. If you've got the bravery and the ability to just jump 4 tires over them, you can cut out a pretty significant portion of time just by being more aggressive over those curbs. Braking zones here. When you go down into turn 1, you have to brake harder to brake later down there from the 400 board, the 300 board, the 200 board. How far can you push it?
Yep.
But you got to get back on throttle soon because you're carrying that speed for over a mile.
Yeah, you got to always be thinking about the exit of the corner and the speed you're carrying here because everything is fast here. And the bigger, one of the real key things here is all of these turns, even the ones that are 180s, like the toe of the boot, long duration, right? And turn 6, you talked about it, falls away. 8 falls away. And so and when you say attacking a corner, you can attack it without being wild out of control, right? And as you said, you've got to be willing. Entry speed into the corners here is massive, but then patience, because if you try to get to the throttle too soon, you just push wide, and at best you have to lift. You lose all your mid corner and exit speed. Worst case, you lift and the car comes around on you. So you've got to enter the corners fast, attack them as you said, but then be patient. Wait till you can start to feed that throttle as you unwind that wheel. And that is really, really crucial at this track. I've talked to a few drivers here, and they said that the first time they ever came here, and these are top-level drivers, right? And they said they went out and they thought they said, okay, I'm not as fast as I think I can be, but I think I'm doing okay. They come in, and instead of maybe being 2 seconds off, where normally they would be on other tracks, they're 4 seconds off. And they realized, ooh, you got to cinch it up here and be willing to get after it to find those last, second, that last second, let alone tenths here, because the really good guys, they attack this place, and you get to that limit entering the corner, and then what separates to me a really good driver from a great driver is a really good driver can find that limit occasionally. The great drivers can live there. You get to it, and then you stay at it, and that's what you need to do at this track to be really fast.
So you see the cars getting loaded up on the rollbacks right now. Just asked Adam Jabay for an update on the drivers in a moment, so we'll get that information to you when we can. Again, two Sunday Cup cars off at turn number 10. One, the number 801 of Daniel Malloy, and the other, the 488 of Matt Dietland. The 488, again, qualified into the podium sprint as is, so hoping that that's damage that can be repaired. Otherwise, that'll be a forfeit, unfortunately. Of course, at this point, the competition, the last thing on his mind, I'm sure. But this means that the Falcon Club TR cars are getting set up on the grid, and they know that they're being held a little bit longer here for a track cleanup, so that's got to be playing into your mind, Greg. Again, yesterday we saw some pretty representative times. It was relatively dry, so this is wet practice for these drivers for later. I'm not sure how many drivers will really be pushing the limits here to try to go fast. I mean, we know it's just too hard to go quick right now.
Yeah, and if you're in the podium sprint, you're going to want to run a couple of laps that are relatively quick so that you feel the grip. But again, we talk about that puddle there. You might be running through that on a dry lap, that part of the track, because you're just going to get up on that exit curve there. Well, not now. And the other thing you talked about was in the dry where you attack, like down into one, you brake really, really late. Especially if you're going to try and make an overtake, but you attack, you go in deep. Well, in the dry, you've got to or in the wet, you have to back everything off a little bit. Every input you make in the wet has to be smoothed out, and you can't chuck anything in there, like going into the toe of the boot where you get the hill. There, where you can just kind of really throw it into that corner because you're going to get that compression and grip. Well, in the wet, you just start to slide if you overdo it. So you got to, everything has to, sort of expand a little bit. You brake a little earlier, a little softer, so you get to that grip point, through the corner, but you can't just go in and stomp on the binders because you're going to lock up and slide. So and if you haven't had a lot of wet time on a track, it can mess with your head a little bit because it's slippery, and it takes a little while for you to figure it out. I go back to Brainerd, my first ever wet race there. I was struggling, and I was going into turn 10 at Brainerd, which has a little bit of banking to it, leads onto that long, mile-long front straight, and my foot slipped off the brake pedal. And I thought, oh, no, I'm going to, as your head process, I thought this is going to be big. I may not hit anything, but because there's a lot of runoff, but this is going to be ugly. And so I couldn't get turned in. And I went wide around it, which was up on that bank a little bit. It just hooked up, and I shot through that corner, and the light bulb went off. So I started trying that on all the other corners. I ended up coming in at the end of that session with a grin on my face because it was fun, because you're just driving those little slides. So it can be really fun once you find that comfort level.
And there's also, here at Watkins Glen, there's a couple places where if you get something wrong, especially on entry to a corner, you can bail. Turn 1, turn 8, turn 10, all have big asphalt runoffs. So if you get it wrong, just go straight. There's plenty of pavement there to allow you to slow on down. Adam Jabay just let me know that the driver of the fit, the 488 of Matt Dietland, drove in on his own power, so that's good news.
Great news.
And we'll get you an update on Dan Malloy when we get a chance to get an update on him, as we wait for the start of the next session. And it looks like the Falcon Club TR cars are rolling, heading out of pit lane for the NOS Energy Track Battle Championship qualifying 2. Again, this is an onboard now. This is an S2000 we're jumping on board with as we head down the hill and onto the racetrack. And again, warm-up lap, just feel things out, and then this is practicing for podium sprint, and it might even be better later. Who knows? But right now it's cool and certainly pretty tricky challenging conditions. So we'll see how it goes, Greg.
Well, and that's the interesting thing is I looked at 3 different weather apps this morning, and none of them agreed. They all agreed it was going to be cloudy today. But one of them said it's going to rain all day. The other one said rain was going to stop at 8. Another one said there would be intermittent. So who knows, right? I mean, and also with huge Lake Seneca right up the road here, it affects things a little bit. So it's possible that this rain could ease off, maybe even stop. So maybe that third qualifying run could be dry, nice and cool. And if the rain hasn't washed the track of too much rubber and made it what they call green and a little bit more slippery, you can see some really fast times in Q3, and then you could end up having podium sprint in the wet again. We don't know, so you've just got to get out. And here's the deal: you drove a long way, you paid your entry fee. It's odds are at some point at another period during this season you're going to be somewhere where it's going to be wet.
Yep.
So get a little track time. You don't have to push it 1,000,000% here, but get out, get some track time. Try and find that little bit of comfort in these conditions.
And the onboard there is with Matthew Koval out of Granger, Indiana. It's the 2001 S2000, the number 20 car. So we'll have an onboard shot of him as the cars work their way around course and head down into the boot for the first time on this warm-up.
And those S2000s are a very popular platform in grid life in general. We see them in the NOS Energy Track Battle Championship, but a number of them run sometimes in different configurations, obviously, in the Touring Cup. And I think part of it is because they're very well balanced.
Yeah, very well balanced. And again, it's the classic front engine, rear drive, lightweight sort of scenario. And I think the only real modern, I don't even call it an equivalent, but the only real modern car that is similar in performance is the FRS BRZ GR86 platform, and we're seeing more and more of those now. Basinski and a K-swapped BRZ. There's a couple GR86s out here this weekend. So similar strategy with that front engine, rear drive layout, low center of gravity, very well handling cars. And here in Club TR, there's an interesting mix of engine swaps versus drivers on the stock engines in these cars, a K24 versus the F20 that would come in these cars. Power does matter usually, but here this weekend, this might not be one with a powerful engine. That was something Dana Basinski was worried about coming into the weekend, but with the fast time that he ran in qualifying, I think he's sitting pretty in that number 109 BRZ.
I think so too, and one of the things in wet conditions, weight can be your friend, which it usually isn't necessarily in the dry, because weight does two things. One, it just helps plant the car, and so when you turn into a corner in the wet, everything about driving a race car, whether it's dry or wet, is all physics, right? And weight transfer. Well, when you have a heavy car and you load up those tires, that just really plants them. Now, once they go, obviously, now you've got a lot of centrifugal mass, so you've got to drive them well. The other thing is the weight gets your tires to build up heat and therefore the pressure to get them into the right pressure area for them to be at their best in terms of being effective. So, that's also a nice thing. And in these conditions, if you have a slightly heavier car that's maybe a little down on power, that can be a great weapon because it's tougher for that car to light them up when you go to throttle. I've often seen, drivers that have been having a little engine issue, during a weekend, and they're a couple seconds off the pace in the dry. Then it gets wet, and that engine issue almost lacks like a naturally occurring form of traction control. And they're suddenly just as competitive as it gets because it's just difficult for that car to spin the rears.
It's just the great equalizer, right?
Yeah.
Low power. It doesn't really matter when you can't use the power, and that's going to be even true in the Street GT, Street Mod, the Track Mod categories we're going to see later today. One thing that might help drivers in those categories is having all-wheel drive, something that we don't see, at least not on the entry list this weekend. Just got an update on Dan Malloy, who was involved in that incident at turn number 10 in that Mazda 2. Dan is okay, so that's good news. The car is certainly looking a little bit worse for wear, but that's the challenge and sometimes the risk of driving at places like this in conditions like this. Sometimes it bites you, Greg.
Well, and the thing is, any racetrack, any condition can bite you. So, that's one of the risks. As soon as you strap in the car and you send in your entry fee, you're accepting the fact that, things can happen. That's why we hold the races. We don't just line the cars up and go, well, that one looks fast, he's the winner. You go out and you get after it. And so they're prepared for that. You certainly don't expect it, obviously, and so when it happens, it can be a little bit of a shock. But it's not like you went in and there's no way anything like that is going to happen. So just something that you have to be a bit prepared for, and hopefully that wasn't a car he drove to the track.
Right. Here's Dana Basinski working his way through turn number 10 now, coming back to 11 to complete his first wet lap of the session. We are almost 6 minutes into the session and completing the first lap, so that's how slippery it is. You see a little slide there out of turn 9 for one of the several GRD6s. That might be Lyle Zyra in the 781. There's a handful of GRD6s and BRZs out there, and they all kind of look the same. So from a distance, a little bit tricky. Basinski across the line at a 242.1. So that will obviously not be an improvement from yesterday. By the way, Adam just sent me a message, and this is an important thing I think I should share.
Yeah.
Is that Dan Malloy had a head and neck restraint, which is not required safety equipment in Falcon Sunday Cup. But, Greg, this is the moment when you're glad you made that investment in the safety gear.
You bet. And the Hans device or the other versions of it are absolutely the smartest thing you can do. What they do is they use like a seatbelt ratchet system. I'm oversimplifying things. So if you get a head-on or a side-on, because a lot of these seats now have partial wraparounds, but any head-on or an angular side-on, your head's still with that little helmet that may not weigh much. When you get G-loads, it becomes a serious bit of centrifugal force, and it literally, like a seatbelt, will ratchet it. So you might move, but it retains you without making it a really sudden stop. And they save so many people serious injury. If you're going to race, just get one.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Yep. So cars on track now as they head up the S's and continue their way around. Basinski at a 242.1, Lyle Zyra 249.5. Then Blake Fitzgerald, Matthew Koval, Ryan Schabel, the Dead Boys FRS, Chris Nahill, and Daniel Persing on track. Only 8 of our Club TR entries, which is about half of them on track right now. And again, the way the qualifyings are set up, you don't have to run all of them. You could only just run one, which a lot of drivers, I think, might do. However, if you're in that top 5 going for that podium sprint and you don't take the opportunity to get some practice laps in now, it's only going to hurt you to not be on the racetrack right now. They just might be waiting for the weather to warm up a little bit, the clouds to clear, maybe we'll get some dry patches, and they'll get another shot in qualifying 3 later today.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things in watching here that a lot of drivers are in this category have really figured out is not only don't you want to get up on the curbs, you actually, even if you think, all right, I want to still drive relatively close to the normal line through this section of corners, like up through the S's, you still want to be a good foot or more off of that actual curb, just the curb itself, because at the bottom of the curb is where you often get water pooling just a little bit. And so everybody is being mindful of that and just staying away from them a bit. And I've been really impressed with what I've been seeing up through the exit at 9. A lot of drivers have figured out that if you run out like you normally would there, because of the fact that it goes a little off camber and then you've got that barrier, there's a puddle there, everybody's just staying mid-track coming through 9. Yep. That's the quick way to do it.
An improvement for Basinski at 240.488. And Dana yesterday was struggling with a fuel pump issue, had to replace the fuel pump, got that sorted. And was kind of watching the chats yesterday. Dana would be position number 11 in a GLTC race. And this car, at some point in the future, will probably transition to being a GLTC car. He just got a full cage put in it, so it's prepped almost. And he was trying to kind of gauge where he would be in GLTC. So this car is very close to GLTC prep, and it's going to give us an idea what we're going to see in race 2, which comes up here in not too long from now at about 10 o'clock, which is about an hour away. So here comes Dana into the bus stop, kind of mid-track here. Greg onto the brakes. Whoa, a little bit of a slip and slide, and instead of bailing, he's going to go for it, and he's certainly getting after it now.
Well, and that was the right thing to do. You started to see it wiggle a little bit. He just was patient. Let it straighten out, continue to apply slight brake pressure. Then when it straightened out, a little bit more brake, turn in, stay off of all those curbs, and go. And if you watched his line up through the S's, middle of the track the whole way, smart. And, watch it here, because if you get to those curbs, it's going to be pretty sketchy, right? And so you just stay off of them a little bit. Oh, wiggle there.
That is Lyle Zyra in the 781 GR86. And, again, the entrance to the bus stop there, there's places to escape if you get it wrong. So I think this is an area where drivers are okay to push it a little bit more, because the worst that's going to happen is you're going to go straight, you're going to go through the grass. You're not going to hit anything there. So a lot of track opens up. Here's a pair of GRD6s. This is like a Toyota commercial down here, despite the Hyundai N boards on the side, the stream partners here with us for the season. But here comes the 230 car down the hill. That's Daniel Persing in his GR86. And again, staying off of the painted lines. And you see the brake lights coming on here in the dry. You're flat all the way through the S's up the hill and all the way to the bus stop.
Yeah, absolutely. You turn in right onto that curb, you are flat chat all the way up the hill. And so now you just want to get rid of a little bit of speed. And that's the other thing that can save you if you have a moment in one of these areas where there is a little bit of runoff, is coming into the bus stop, you're not approaching it anywhere near the speed you would in the dry. So if something goes a little bit awry, you're not going as fast to start with. And so, if you just recognize that, straighten the wheel out, you're going to stop a lot easier and quicker. But the interesting thing here, as well as we're watching this, is as you work through these turns, every once in a while, you need to expect a little bit of a wiggle. Because if you don't get that on occasion, then you're really not pushing the envelope for speed. And, so the guys that we're seeing that little bit of a wiggle going into the bus stop, that means they're looking for pace here. And if you're in, as we've talked about, in that podium sprint already at this stage, you want to have a few laps where you can go, all right, that, I need to be a little bit more gentle in that corner. But maybe in this one I can push a little bit. The next lap you try it, you find that limit. But you always, in racing, every input has to be smooth and gentle, and you baby step your increases. And that's how you become effective in the wet.
So there's that number 20 who we were riding on board with earlier, Koval, in the number 20. Lyle Zyra comes across the stripe again at a 2:47.206, but it's still Basinski 7 seconds clear. As far as the top 5 goes, no changes from yesterday, so that continues to be the case here as we work our way through. Now, working on a timing issue. This is because Club TR and Sunday Cup got split. They were in the same session yesterday.
Right.
We're trying to connect all the pieces back together in the back end as we see our street class getting set up and gridded here on the pit lane right in front of us here in the front straightaway. And 12 minutes into this Club TR session, I could expect pretty shortly to have a checkered flag and send everybody back. We did get about 10 drivers on track there, which is all but a handful of our Falcon Club TR competitors for the NOS Energy Track Battle Championship. And in a few minutes, the street cars will take to the course. And now we're getting into 300, 400, 500 horsepower cars. Front drive, rear drive, all-wheel drive. This is where it's going to start to pick up speed a little bit on the straightaways and especially.
Right. And here's the thing. If you're in one of these street cars that comes equipped with ABS and traction control, it's an aid. And, there are some people that think, well, then I can do anything I want, right? No, because all it does is assist you. It doesn't rewrite the laws of physics, right? So if you're exceeding the grip, whether you've got ABS going in or traction control coming out, if you're exceeding the grip level, that car is going to move. And if you're in the middle of a turn and you go to throttle, even with traction control, sometimes actually that can help pitch you into a spin in the wet, because what it does, it's invasive and it just retards the rotation sometimes of the wheel. And but what the issue is, you cannot exceed the grip levels. If you've got a lot of aero in the car, yes, you get that assist, but still there's a point where if you exceed it, you're going to slide, and ABS and traction control doesn't eliminate that. So use it wisely, but understand it's not a panacea. It just erases all the laws of physics.
There's the 129 of Johnny Rose and his Toyota GR86. This one a silver one, a little bit different. His best lap, a 3:02.469. Again, brake lights coming on up the hill, staying driver's left. The camber here, the water will sometimes flow to the inside and then downhill. So driver's left heading up through turn 2, not a bad strategy in particular. So Dana Basinski's fastest in this session as he was yesterday, but time's well off because of the track, how wet the track is. But the clouds are beginning to lift a little bit, and that could help dry the track just enough. You can kind of see there's a dry line beginning to sort of form here. You can see how shiny the edges of the track are and how less shiny the middle of the track is.
Well, we saw the shot of the next group of cars sitting on the grid, and it was far less hazy than before these Club TR cars went out. Right now, it's nowhere near as hazy. It's lifting a little bit, and I see, looking out into the paddock area, I don't see anybody with umbrellas on right now. So I think the rain has, possibly abated just a little bit. And the good news is it's breezy, and you might think, okay, it's cold and windy. How unpleasant is that with rain? Well, yeah, if you're standing out in it, but if you want to go drive on a racetrack that's wet and the rain stops and it's windy, it helps dry that track a lot faster. So there are upsides to the misery that some are experiencing here.
Yes, certainly. And well, it looks like as the street cars get gridded, we're going to have a moment of kind of quiet as the Falcon Club TR cars kind of make their way off track, as there's only a few left. Look at the cinematic drops of rain dropping off the chain link fence around here. As there's Magic getting us set up with an onboard camera.
Boy, that's a little spooky.
I wonder if this is Nate Brown's, yes it is. It's Nathan Brown's Volkswagen Golf that camera is going, the 994 car. Nathan Brown, one of our buddies over there at FCP Euro, one of our partners for the season. And he's running in his Volkswagen Golf, and he was 5th yesterday in the first of the 3 qualifying sessions. So he is currently qualified into the podium sprint as is, and given how today's gone so far, he might be in pretty good shape to make it to the podium sprint should things stay this way.
Yep, and we talked about it quite a bit yesterday. Everybody knew what the weather forecast was. The idea yesterday was get out there when it's dry, make sure you've got one good push lap in there, because that could be the one that was going to get you into the podium sprint late day today. So you had to be ready for it. Those that weren't prepared, well, kind of on them. And for those that just had issues, that's unfortunate. But as we said, if this now lifts like it has, this wind, if the track dries, cool conditions with a dry track, motors love that, tires love that, so we can see fast times if we get that 3rd qualifying session in the dry.
One of the comments you made yesterday about Tony Barber and the 333, that heavy Tesla Model 3, we were watching how the tire was kind of compressing under the weight of the car through the high-load corners. I think you made a comment about the wheels in particular. Well, Tony Barber cracked a wheel yesterday on a curb in the bus stop. So it goes to show you how much weight and load and energy is being transferred in those scenarios here as Basinski picks up the checkered. It's a fast racetrack. You're putting a lot of load on the tires, even in the wet. It was a little damp yesterday when they went out, but that's still a broken wheel. As far as I know, that they've gotten another one, then they're good to go. So, and there will be some more. I will mention that I think it's in this group, potentially, there's going to be a couple track mod cars that go out. Those are the Model 3 Challenge cars. They're going to run a mock Model 3 Challenge session on their own on track kind of in the background. So if we see that, and actually you can see them pulling on track right now in the background.
Yep.
So what's going to happen here is in this group, these cars are going to go out, and then the Teslas are going to run their own little kind of pseudo wheel-to-wheel race, and we'll see if we can get a camera shot of that as they're testing out their rule set for their official first event, which I think is going to come potentially at Lime Rock Park later this year. I can't remember exactly what their schedule is, but it's coming up.
That's exciting.
And again, it's an exciting form because you don't have to put a cage in it because you're not really racing.
Yeah.
You're just kind of chasing each other, and when you get within a certain zone, then you have to facilitate a pass. It's an interesting way to kind of get around the requirements of having a cage to race and keep the entry level for Tesla owners relatively low. They don't have to tear apart their car completely.
And in the wet, those Teslas are very effective. One, they're all-wheel drive. Two, as you talked about, because of the batteries, they're very, very heavy. And as a result, everything we've talked about with the weight transfer, the all-wheel drive, it's a perfect storm for those cars in the damp to be really, really strong.
So cars, this is going to be a big group of cars, actually. And one of the cars in this group is a Hyundai Elantra N, and I believe that is Vijay Lorik in the 724. And this is, I believe, a very similar Elantra N to the one that we rode in yesterday, Greg. And I even had a little bit of experience over there at turn number 10. That car will rotate on you. It is a front drive car, and it kind of falls in terms of the relative speed, if you're thinking about it in Honda terms, you've got your Civic Si, you've got your Civic Type R, and the Elantra N is a real good, happy medium in there. And it really does rotate well on the racetrack, and I experienced that yesterday, that if I was pushing harder, then certainly the limit is not an understeer situation. It is an oversteer situation. And loose is fast, Greg, and I had a good time in the Elantra N yesterday, and we're going to see some content about that later in the weekend on the GridLife social media. But what a blast that was, even for just one lap that we got to ride around in that car.
It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it too once I got out of the car and thought about it. No, I'm kidding. It was fun, and you gave it a bit of welly and gave it a ride. And yeah, I mean, turn 10 over there, that's the thing with a front drive car. And again, it gets back to that physics thing. Even a front drive car, when you accelerate, it squats, and you brake, it dives, right? Well, that's weight transfer. And so when you're hard on it in a front drive car and you lift a little bit, it goes a little dive to the front, loosens the back up, and really adept front wheel drive racers, they use that rotation to help null out push in various sections of the track. And once you figure out how to drive them, they're a blast.
It really is cool. And you know what? I think it's really cool that we've got this Elantra N that we've got for the season to show you in the track previews, but now we've seen competitors out here in them, which I don't think I've seen an Elantra N in street class before. So a new entry to that category, and certainly a car capable of running up in the mix. As cars are released here, street class for the NOS Energy Track Battle Championship, rolling now for qualifying 2. Again, trying to get inside the top 5 in their category to qualify for that podium sprint. On board there with Nate Brown as he creeps onto the racetrack here.
Yeah, and creep is the right way to put it, because the last thing you want to do, for a variety of reasons, including the relentless ribbing you're going to get from friends and competitors if you stick it into the guardrail leaving the pit lane. So there's a lot of motivation to be very gentle out of the pit lane. One, because it isn't run on very much, so you're not really sure where there's going to be grip in the wet at this stage. And again, everybody very, very smartly just gently feeling it out here in these conditions. But looking out here, we can see areas not where we're seeing a break in the clouds, but where we're seeing the clouds a lot lighter than the just heavy, dark stuff that we had. And that usually indicates that the rain's easing off. And if it stays that way, and with this wind, if we can get a dry line out there, I mean, talk about precision, but the good drivers that can drive very precisely, you could see some times that will be impressive as we get a little bit deeper into this Q2.
One of the other cars I see on track is Cal Fortner in the number 14 Street Mod car. I think that's just going to be a hardship lap just to see how that car is performing. Again, they had to make some fixes to the splitter yesterday after it got into the Armco, so he should be good to continue.
Yeah, he got away with one down there with just the splitter damage, and that's really, really nice to see. Here's a look at that car, because he was on a really good lap when it happened. And he did exactly what we've been talking about, ran a little wide at the exit of 1, got up onto that damp curb, and the back end just pivoted around on him.
There's a whole bunch of Tesla Model 3s out there. Again, the ones with the Aero are the Tesla Model 3 challenge cars, and they're going to run a pseudo kind of wheel-to-wheel scenario back there, and we'll cover that a little bit more when we see it happening, if we catch it happening, as the rest of the street cars head out on track and get their warm-up here for this 3.4-mile, 11-turn road course. Lots of elevation. It's a gorgeous facility, a gorgeous racetrack, but the challenges this morning have just been grip level in general with the rain and the wet weather we've seen, and this is just typical upstate New York April weather.
It is. I mean, you can have an absolutely beautiful day here, and then the next day it can be just like this. Part of it is we're in the Finger Lakes region, which is one of the more scenic regions anywhere. But those large bodies of water, they will affect the weather a little bit here. And this setting up on top of one of the big hills, just a little south and west of town, and on a clear day from the right spot on this track, particularly if you're in the grandstands up in the S's, you can actually see Lake Seneca off in the distance. It is gorgeous here, and it's a wonderful facility to come, and they welcome camping, so you can come for some of the big races here and have one heck of a good time.
There's Josh Halka working his way through, having one heck of a time. brake lights on even for him heading up the hill. We're going to see this. You even see this in IMSA with GT3 cars. That's a braking zone in the wet. You just tap the brakes just to kind of settle the car before you climb the hill and up the S's here. And as the track funnels down, the margin for error falls the closer you get to the top of the hill. So you got to slow yourself down and work your way up the hill and see him right center track, just like we saw Dana in the prior session here. And on the brakes for the inner loop. Actually, see, like he's got like an Aero under tray or something kind of
a little loose there,
hanging down or something there, but it's not quite dragging or touching the track just yet.
Nope. He's running a nice wide line, staying well off those curbs. You talk about that, seeing those brake lights. That can be a couple of things, and one of the things you put was just to settle the car, right? Sometimes, obviously, if you brake hard, you're braking for a tighter corner. But sometimes going into a turn, you're really not so worried about braking to reduce speed as you are, one, to plant the nose a little bit, just get a little more weight on those front tires to help facilitate turn in. And sometimes you'll be on power and you just brush the brake while you're on power, and it just sort of drags everything down. And as you said, that just plants the car. It literally puts weight on the front and it settles the back a little bit and stabilizes it before you turn into a really quick piece of track.
And there is a whole bunch of Tesla Model 3s all running line. Actually, a whole bunch of everything running line to stern right now. 370Z, a Mini Cooper, a Mercedes AMG GTS, old Subaru Impreza, an Evo, and a whole bunch of Model 3s. They all walk into a bar, Greg.
Now you're going to have me thinking about how do we finish that joke.
Yeah, I didn't walk into it with a finish in mind. So
yeah, I know.
I'm in trouble. And again, you mentioned yesterday the weight of the Teslas being an advantage, and it helps kind of break through that film on the surface of the road. And again, I think they're going to be relatively cautious back here for a little while. But Tony Barber also joining the party in that 333. Might know that he's not going to go faster than yesterday, so join the Model 3 Challenge boys and see how they're doing it over there.
Absolutely. And just get some track knowledge in these conditions because he is in right now in that podium sprint, and you're going to want to get some laps in on this track in these conditions. If you are pretty comfortable that you're in that podium sprint right now, good look there at Nathan Brown and that VW GTI. Boy, that is a car that has just been on the grassroots level of racing, has been an absolute stalwart category car. I mean, there are some that have been running for a quarter of a century in various different club racing formats, and they're just always really good. And it's because, one, they just handle. They're really sweet handling cars, even the ones that are a lot older. I mean, it all started with the old, the Pro VW Cup way back in the day, and there were some, pretty solid pro racers that's where they got their start.
Certainly. Nathan Brown working his way up the hill. It was cool to watch the heel toe, the old-fashioned three-pedal downshifting. As cars get more and more advanced, Greg, you're seeing less and less of that. I even cheated a little bit yesterday in our onboard lap because the Hyundai Elantra N has auto rev match. And again, I hadn't had enough time to practice heel towing, and you hit the button and you just throw it into gear and it figures out the rest for you with the computer. And I just think that's the coolest thing. And
I was wondering. Now, I was obviously pretty focused on the road ahead, but every once in a while when you were making those pretty aggressive downshifts and it was so smooth, and I went, wow, has Kyle been really practicing? And I looked over and it's like, Technology.
Yeah. And it's a cool feature because, while you're getting comfortable, you can use it. And as you learn and practice, you can turn that off. And then you can just drive it the old-fashioned way. And that's a really neat feature. And I found it very successful. But it is cool to watch the old three-pedal here.
You bet.
As we go down it. There it is. Right foot on the brake, clutch, and then right there you see his foot rotate just to blip the throttle there to rev match on the downshift. And that's what basically brings the revs back up so the gears slot right in.
And even if you've got a synchro mesh tranny, you still need to do that blip because it can still lock the wheels up a little bit with the engine braking when you don't want it to. And to me, I used to call that the racing ballet. I mean, that footwork that you're doing. And you think about it, when you're the pro drivers back in the day, coming from 160 miles an hour down into a 50-mile-an-hour turn, coming down through 3 or 4 gears, doing that, the heel and toe, blipping the throttle, doing the downshift, and you're trying to pass somebody. That's what made those drivers so special to me. And you watch Ayrton Senna's qualifying runs, Suzuka, Monaco, when he just obliterated track records, that was with a gated box, and he was doing downshifts almost as fast as the modern ones are. That's a gift.
Seeing right now a little bit of Model 3 Challenge practice. We saw that one of those passes being facilitated. Again, the way that this rule set is going to work, it's going to be basically a spec construction, spec parts for the Tesla Model 3, and they're going to run in a big group. And when you get in within a certain zone on the racetrack, basically a certain time delta, the driver in front of you is required to give you a point by, and then you facilitate that pass, and then you're right back on. And if you get back in that zone, then you can repass. And so it's an interesting kind of mix between a track day and a wheel-to-wheel race, and that's what they're trialing right now for their first competition a little bit later this year. There's Richard Cho.
It's a great concept.
It really is a cool concept, and it's a great thing to have as many cars as they do here this weekend. Give it a shot, and Richard Cho had a big slide at turn 9, and he will stay on the track. There's Devin Herndon in the Mercedes GLA 45 AMG. He's heading down to turn number 1 right now. And he was also one of the drivers, I believe, that had just got knocked out of the top 5 late in qualifying 1 yesterday afternoon.
And right now, fast time is a 2:37.7 by Edward Siegel in the number 470, the Honda Civic Type R. And that's, it's still well off where this track would be in the dry, but it's an indication that there is indeed a dry-ish line starting to form where the water has been moved off. The tires with the sipes and the grooves take that, and you can see the spray coming off of the side, and then that if you got Aero in the car, it helps push it off a little bit farther, and you're starting to see a little bit of a groove developing out there.
Yeah, there's another point bypass there in the Tesla Model 3 Challenge group, heading down into turn 1 and tracking back to the left here, and then running that kind of the rim shot around the outside of turn 1, and then you have to keep it tight because you don't want to touch the paint on driver's left there. And the track is pretty narrow at the exit of 1, so you're naturally, the racing line will take you up onto that curb. So you have to kind of pinch it a little bit to keep it off in the wet when it's slippery.
Well, and also, again, turn 1 goes downhill, right? So as you turn in, at the bottom it does flatten a little bit, so you do get a little bit of camber, if you will, where it'll compress a bit. But much of it, as you're doing your full turn in, you're falling down the hill, you're a little bit off camber, you're going to push. That's the nature of a turn like that. And so you've got to be prepared for that. You've got to get your turn in right, and you've got to, you can't, again, it's another instance of at this track, after turn in, patience, and not getting on the throttle too soon, because any downhill turn, as you get on the throttle too soon while you have steering input, you're just going to push wide. It's, it's going to not want to turn.
So here comes Eddie Siegel in the Honda Civic down the front straightaway across the stripe here, and he is the fastest driver in the session at a 2:34.6. So the lap time's beginning to come down a little bit.
Great graphics on that car.
It is a great looking car. The Acuity color is always very striking with that cyan and the purple. And up the hill he will go again.
Now, and we just saw him. He did not even brush the brake going up the hill, so I think he's starting to feel that, the grip's starting to really come there. He just turned in and kept it at near full chat on his way up the hill. So I think he's thinking, yep, we're getting into that window as the checker flag comes out, Kyle.
Yeah, checkered flag out. You see Eddie Siegel's going to be the first one to get there, flashing the headlights. And we'll head on through the bus stop now at a little bit of a slower speed. And that was not a super long session, but there was some street mod cars in there too, Greg. So I think that was also the only street mod cars that were going to take a run, which means that our next group should be the track mod group. And then that would also include, Street GT.
Street GT probably
is up next.
Yep.
Okay.
And
Ido Waxman again in the number 84. What an incredible lap he had yesterday, a 2:01. That is flying around here in that Corvette C6. And he's going to sit right on the front of this next group. There's Jackie Dean creeping in the background. Told me yesterday that he really was enjoying that M2 around Watkins Glen. Said it just floats so nicely over all the curbs and everything, and he was quick.
Well, and we were talking about that, weren't we, during that session, watching that car up in the curves, that it was really compliant. It just soaked the curves up, but it didn't unload the car. You didn't see the car bouncing or getting, awkward and getting compromised. That platform was really stable, and man, you like that in a race car where you can be aggressive on the curbs and still have that platform rigidity that helps you change directions. So I can imagine Jackie was just grinning. And hearing what his plans are for that car and knowing that he starts off with that level of handling and platform support, he's got to be just grinning ear to ear. And Waxman, that lap he put in, I mean, he was, 3-4 seconds clear of the field. At first we thought, was that a cut?
Yeah,
know?
I mean, but where do you cut only 3 seconds? The only place you could is the bus stop, and they have eyes on that over there, Greg. They're not going to let you get away with that. And what was so impressive is, yeah, this car's fast in a straight line, and it can go really quick, but it's got no aero on it. So, I mean, at a track like this, that can be pretty aero-dependent in some of the faster corners. That lap time was especially impressive because it's so slicked back. It's really just a straight-line bullet, and to make it 201 with a car like that was impressive.
It is, and you think about it, yes, there are some long, fast sections here. You know, really through the S's in the dry. In most cars, that's fairly flat, right? And you've got that run down from the toe of the boot to the heel. That's very fast. So you think, okay, that makes sense. But when you look at the layout of this track, look at the amount of time you are in corners. That's the huge difference, and that's where Aero pays. And so for him to be able to throw that lap in, you know, in a car with 0 in terms of any Aero on it, you know, was really impressive. And what sort of paid that point off completely was, you think about James Houghton, right? He went out in qualifying and he was just running a little spoiler. He had taken the big wing off the back of his Acura in the Touring Cup, and it was an awful session for him. And afterwards, I think he talked to you, and he said it was deadly.
Yeah.
He puts the big wing on, goes out in the wet,
wins the race.
Wins it, because now he had that stability on the car, right? The aero generator.
So again, without it, I mean, you can certainly go quick, but it's going to be especially hard in the rain because you're relying less on mechanical grip and more on aero, and that's just going to be an extra challenge here. It was still kind of an in-between condition yesterday when that 201 got ran. So I think in the dry, this car would easily be a sub 2-minute car.
I think
easily.
so too. You bet.
But again, the conditions today are not going to let him go quite as fast as he would like. How about that view down the back straightaway, Greg?
That is, you know, I mean, just the rolling hills here in this Finger Lakes area are as beautiful as it gets. That's downright bucolic.
Never heard that word before in my life. You have to tell me what that means.
It basically means, you know, pastoral. You know, I mean, you know, you see the farmlands and everything that just rolls off into the distance. It's just beautiful up here. And I'll tell you, yeah, this is one of those places that in the morning light, when it's, you know, a sunny morning, and right as the sun starts to peak, and it just lights all of this area up with all this green, or in the autumn, obviously, with that soft, you know, light that photographers just chase everywhere. This is one of the prettiest places you can imagine.
I love seeing the farms off there in the distance. And, you know, what was interesting, Greg, is we talked about the way the course used to be, the 1948 to 1952 course. Then, of course, this track, constructed originally in 1956, there was an intermediate course that they ran on streets here at the same site from 1953 to 1955. And I actually, as much as I've enjoyed this racetrack over the years, I'm local to here, I never knew where that intermediate layout ran. And basically the road you take to get into the racetrack was one of those roads that was part of the track. And then the road between turns 1 and actually, if we could get a shot right here. So you see where that flag stand is, that gantry? That road that comes across the racetrack and heads up to the right of your screen, that was part of that intermediate course.
Okay.
And it would run up the hill towards now where the garages are. It took a right and then kind of rejoined, I think it was Bronson Hill Road that's just behind us here at this facility. The drivers hated it because you couldn't see anything because the corner, long straightaways, and you come up to a very tight 90-degree corner, and it was about 4 miles long, I believe. So they only ran that for a couple of years before they built the 1956 course. But it was just a fascinating learn to know about this course that I don't think a lot of people consider.
Even knew ever existed. You're right. And the cool thing, folks, is if you've never been to this area, Watkins Glen State Park, and a glen, obviously, it's a little, you know, sort of mini canyon that's been created by a river, and Watkins Glen State Park is stunning. It's just beautiful. And the track wraps basically around that, goes through town, and it's well marked. And so you can easily come here and drive that original track. And, you know, you think about, they're driving around, you know, we were talking about it in 48, it was a pre-war Alfa Romeo that won the thing. And you talked about it, bicycle tires, and absolutely no protection, no guardrail, no nothing.
This leather helmet will be great when I hit this tree.
Yeah. Or when I I just plunk right into the side of that cliff face. They didn't know any better. I mean, that was the Aero, right? But you can drive it, and you can see how this was born, and the entire idea of this track and Road America, which was also they ran around the Elkhart Lake area, similar to what they did here, the same thing. Both of those tracks, the design that they did was to, as closely as possible, mimic the racing on those public roads, to make it feel somewhat like you were on those public roads with the elevation change and everything. And that's what makes tracks like this so special, is they're as close as it was to the old days.
It's fascinating when you look at the original layout to the course that exists now. You can point at about 3 or 4 particular corners and say that's what they were trying to accomplish. And the radii is a little different, and the width is a little different, but the concept of, hey, this is a right, and then we're going uphill sweeping S's, and then we're gonna have this long straightaway, and then we're gonna have this long right-hand corner that goes downhill. All of that is represented here at this racetrack. And these S's here, representative of, if you go back into town to the Sinclair gas station that's in town, coming south on I think that's 414. If you take a right at that Sinclair, that's the 90. That's the shot, the turn way at the back there. And then you go up to these sweeping S's, and that's what's represented here. I think they did a little bit better job making them flowy with these of race course, but certainly representative.
Yeah, and that's what makes it such a pleasure to come out here and drive. And if you know that history a little bit, then when you get on this track, it just sort of gives you that little bit of that inside knowledge that makes it all the more relevant and exciting. And if you then look back to the Grand Prix era here at this track, it won, I think, 4 years in a row. It was voted by by the promoters organization Race of the Year. It paid, in terms of combined purse, and back then they also had appearance money. This track, one of the reasons it was so popular, aside from the setting, how welcoming Watkins Glen was, a number like the lodge over in the park, and I can't remember the name of it, on the outside of town as you head up the hill.
Glen Motor Inn.
The Glen Motor Inn. Yep. Were so welcoming to the drivers and everything. But another reason was when you combined the purse money and appearance money, and that was a big thing back in the day, was appearance money. You combine that for this race alone, oftentimes it topped the entirety of the remainder of the schedule. So obviously the teams and drivers had a lot of reasons to come here and like this place.
Yeah, I have a lot of reasons to like it too, but it's mostly because I grew up around here.
Right, yeah.
And this is a homecoming for me, certainly. Haven't been at GRIDLIFE since the fall of 2020. I'd been here once working with the World Challenge group, but to come back here with the GRIDLIFE family was a big deal, and this is a big weekend for us, and it's really neat to see all my friends go out there and experience the same love that I have for this place. And almost everyone I talked to yesterday, they go, this place is so cool. It's so fast. It's so grippy. And, the grip has gone away with the weather, but the rest still stands. Yep. And I think the other thing about it is that it retains so much character. The courses that were designed in the 50s and 60s, I'm talking about Mid-Ohio, Lime Rock, Road America, Watkins Glen, Sebring, all these old tracks that have this character. You can feel it. You can tell. And there's nothing against the newer racetracks that we participate at, but they just don't have the same built on the land, not into it sort of thing.
Yep.
So it's just a fascinating place. And you can't really build racetracks like this anymore. At least, I think the only one I would probably put in that category is the Ozarks track, the Ozarks International Raceway. That is a very old school style racetrack that you're almost wondering, how did they build that?
Yeah, and how'd they get away with it?
In
this day and age. And that's the thing. You look at some of the more modern venues, the track itself can be challenging and everything, but they're done with, it's just so much paved runoff and everything that you kind of just lose that feel, of, okay, I'm literally driving on a ribbon here, and here you really get that feel. Road America, all of those tracks that you talked about, Road Atlanta is another one.
Road Atlanta, yeah.
Same thing. They're consequential tracks, and they're very fast, like the old tracks were, and there's just something about them, And like Sebring, obviously, that was an old airport track, and it is the bumpiest place in the world in terms of a racetrack. And so many people often ask, the drivers, as the drivers are going, God, I just couldn't get it settled on the bumps, and they're whining and complaining, and then they say, well, so do you think they should pave this? No,
don't do that,
because that track, like these, have character.
Yep.
And that really sets them apart.
And that's even true on the oval side of things. I think for the longest time, drivers fought against the repave of Atlanta Motor Speedway for the same reasons, where it had this character, this abrasiveness that caused a whole bunch of tire fall off, made for some really good racing, and they just pushed, don't pave it, don't pave it, don't pave it, and then they had to for drainage purposes, and since then it's not been the same.
Exactly. So that's what makes these places destinations as opposed to just a racetrack, you know. And I mean, how many people, when we were standing in line talking to drivers that were coming through registration, had never been here but had seen races on TV, and they said, I don't care what the weather is, I don't care, I just cannot wait for my first time rocketing through the S's and attacking the inner loop. I just want that, you know. Every one of them had some aspect of this track, some corner sequence that they were just salivating over.
You know, I want to talk about the inner loop for a second, because it's a challenging section of this racetrack that it was added in 1992. It was added as a safety feature to slow cars down before the outer loop, turn 5. And every time we go there in a simulator, iRacing in particular, or Assetto Corsa, there's a lot of people who go, oh, okay, well, you're using the inner loop. I like just blowing through it and going straight to turn 5. But, you know, and there's a magic to that in some sense, but the inner loop is such a challenging section of racetrack and such a technical section that I think it really adds a lot of value to the lap around here, because it's a huge braking zone. And a lot of this track, you have to be really precise in where you're placing the car, but the bus stop in particular, you have to be precise and aggressive and gutsy, because they have these big old curbs in there. It just adds so much excitement to the lap, and very satisfying bursts when you jump over the curbs and things. And, you know, as much as drivers in the sim want to avoid it because it's hard, in real life they go, that's a fun section.
Well, absolutely. And it isn't a tight, you know, boring chicane, right? It isn't a break, turn thing. It's flowing. It's quick. You know, Daytona, the bus stop there on the back straight for the 24-hour, same idea. They're very fast, flick change of directions. What's not fun about that? You know, going in a straight's great, but you get the opportunity to do a flick at serious speed and get the car a little rotated and make it work. That's the joy. That's what cars do. I mean, that's the beauty of it, right?
Yep.
I mean, one of the greatest things I have ever seen was I got a chance, this was years ago, when James Weaver was still driving for Dyson Racing, and back in the professional sports car era, and I was flagging. I was announcing at Daytona for the 24-hour, but they were short on flaggers for the qualifying day, and I wasn't announcing when that was running. And I said, hey, if you need me, and they said, yeah. So they put me on the bus stop for qualifying for the 24-hour for the prototypes, and watching James Weaver come through there, where it was flick in, flick, go to throttle to rotate the car, power sliding all the way through the second half of that, back up onto the banking. And it's, you know, this one here is fairly similar to that. It's just a thing of beauty, you know.
Yep.
And you could almost see the grin in his helmet, you know. So that's what's really fun. I understand on a video game, you know, maybe it's not quite as cool as just blasting through there, but for real, oh, it's fun.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why they might like it is because it extends that braking zone for turn 5. And I've always said that the longer braking zone that you have, the more exciting it is.
Yeah.
Because you don't you get to faster race cars that have such short braking zones. It makes passing very difficult.
Exactly.
In a racing scenario. So the longer braking zone you have, the more opportunity there is for modulation, the more opportunity there is to make a mistake.
Yeah.
And so it helps facilitate passing. And so I think generally the worse tires, the worse brakes you got, the longer the braking zones are, the better you're going to have from a race perspective.
Absolutely.
That might be part of that.
Absolutely it is. And here's the thing. Everybody, when they put that in, said, well, you know, the track's not going to be as fast. That was one of the things that, you know, the Glen was known for, was just being brutally fast, yada, right? They put that inner loop in. The very next race, when the IMSA, it was the original IMSA series, came back there, they broke the track record in qualifying. So the inner loop didn't slow it down much. And yeah, you know, the tire's a little better in the cars, all of that. But it wasn't like it was broken by a little bit either. And talking to some of the drivers that, you know, were turning these wickedly fast laps, they said what it did was it actually, instead of slowing down into the outer loop, right, they said now you'd come through there, and those cars had so much stick and power, so that you'd come through that, you were accelerating most of the way through the outer loop. And they said, so by the time you got to the exit of that turn, you were going faster than you were with the original layout. So, you know, all of these things have their little dynamics, don't they?
They certainly do.
And to go back real quick on one thing, we were talking about aero and the wet, right? If you've got a car that's really dependent on aero, right, for its grip, and it's really wet, and you can't get up to speed in certain corners, you've got to be going a certain amount of speed for the aero to kick in. And so sometimes you get these cars that are all about aero. That's one of our
that would explain why we have been on a bit of a delay. That is the 214 Tesla Model 3 Challenge car that is running in track mod here this weekend, and certainly looks a little worse for wear there on the left side. The 214 car don't have on my list, unfortunately, because it's out of our registration system. But that car, you see the airbags deployed there, Greg. So that car has found the Armco somewhere.
Yep.
And looks like they're taking it back around. So that's why we've been on a bit of a delay, and this is the third car this morning that we've had. We had a pretty good record yesterday, Greg, so we got off to the greatest start today, but just trying to keep everyone on the road and point in the right direction. And again, the confidence levels rise as you get more and more laps and you start to push a little bit more.
And we're definitely seeing now, areas on this track where we were seeing some pretty significant puddling. That's on the wane. It's looking a lot better. But just to finish my comment, if you've got a car that's really designed around aero, and then you get to a track where in the wet you can't get to those speeds enough to have the aero be really at its full effect, then the car could be really diabolical. So that's something too you got to think about when you're going out in these wet conditions. Is sometimes it's like, oh, it's so slippery, I don't know if I can accelerate, and it's one of those deals where if you can wrap your mind around it, right, it's like go a little faster, because you're actually going to have more grip when you do that, because the aero will then kick in for you.
I've only ridden an aero car once. It was my friend Ben Harisco. He has a Radical SR3, and that's kind of like intro to prototypes basically. And I jumped in the seat with him at Gingerman for a couple of laps, and it almost broke my brain how different it was than driving a car without aero, because everything's different. Because you're charging corners, you're leaning on that downforce to turn in and slow the car down, and all of this. It's a fundamentally different feeling, and also my neck was sore after about 2 laps, and I can't even begin to imagine, a full-on aero car for lap after lap after lap after lap. I mean, it was a wild ride for 5 laps at Gingerman Raceway of all places. So.
Well, and that's why that's why you see like IndyCar drivers, Formula One drivers, and that they're jockey-sized guys with middle linebacker necks.
Yeah,
and that's where a lot of their training goes, is just building those neck muscles, because now you start to see the side loads. And the thing about aero is, if you haven't driven it and then you drive it, until you get your head wrapped around it, like you said, everything you're doing is on sheer faith, because your entire mindset is saying this is not possible. This should not be possible here. And then you find out it works, right? And you're literally taking air and manipulating it to improve grip for the car. And it's a black art. It's a science, to be sure. Adrian Newey will tell you, oh yeah, we can do it. But it's a black science. And if you're not really attuned to it, it takes, Robbie Gordon made the comment when he went from trucks and NASCAR stuff. First time he got in an IndyCar, he said, I was scared to death. He said, because that was not my mindset. He got his head wrapped around it and was wickedly quick. But it's that kind of thing, because you can just, if you were braking at the 4 marker in an aero car, you laugh at the 4-3-2 marker maybe.
Right.
And then you get on the brakes, and if you're not tuned into that, it's eye-opening.
It certainly can.
And neck bending.
Neck bending, yep. NOS Energy Track Battle Championship qualifying 2 for Street GT underway after a little bit of a delay. We're back on track here. The 84 of Vito Waxman, you see him there in the C6 Corvette. And I've talked at length about Corvettes as a platform for track cars. One of the best starting points, one of the best Lego bricks that you can pick out of the pile for pretty much any category in grid life competition.
It really is. And one of the things is they've long been one of the best bangs for the buck in the sports car world. I mean, you get supercar level performance for far less in terms of price. That's start number 1. So you've got a great platform to start with, and it doesn't break the pocketbook. So then if you're going to go out and you're going to race it, you've got that money that otherwise you would have spent on some other high-level car to do the cage, to do tires, to do all of that. So that helps to start with, but it's a really good platform. A lot of power, very well handling, and as we've seen, one of its great gifts in like Touring Cup, where we've got a number of them and they're very restricted on power. what helps you in that category? Being slippery, and boy are they.
Yeah, certainly not very draggy at all. Neither is Jackie Ding driving on by Edo Waxman into the bus stop here. Jackie pretty comfortable in the wet, pretty comfortable in this car already. He doesn't have as much experience in this as he does in the Supra that he has run in the street modified category, but you see that there's a little bit of a new, I just noticed that there's a little strip of pavement that's repaved there exiting the bus stop into the inner loop, and that looked a little greasier.
Yep.
And we saw that car kind of wiggle as it went over that section as he now heads down into the boot.
And that's one of the things. I mean, they did such a great job on this repave that it's very, you know, I mean, every part of this track is very similar. But that one patch, and you get to tracks where you've got all of these tarmac changes. You've got pavement, you know, fixes at the apex, and you've got another chunk of this part has been paved, and then you got concrete over here. Every one of those has different grip coefficients in the dry, and then you throw some water onto it, and man, you got to be up on the wheel.
Certainly do. So, and again, we've got, I think, at least three, maybe four generations of Corvette represented in this session alone. We have a C5 Corvette, Mike Kubiak is out there, a C6 Corvette with Edo Waxman, a C7 Corvette just drove by, and there is a C8 Corvette of Andy Volkel, who I think had that big off right here in the bus stop yesterday through the grass, and then ended up coming back out and improving his lap time to get himself into the podium sprint as it stands. Again, the goal here, be top 5 in your class, but no one's going faster than they went yesterday right now.
Nope, not at this stage. But, you know, as we said, if it continues like this, because we've got a Touring Cup race coming, we've got Drift, and Drift, of course, you know, gets a lot of water dispersed off of the track. By the time Q3 comes around, if there's a dry line and you're a driver that's very precise, you can do some things here. I mean, I remember back in the original IMSA, in the glory days of those fire-breathing Nissan 300ZXs, and Steve Millen, as qualifying came out for that classic car, there was literally 2 lines all the way around Sebring. It was damp offline, but 2 lines that were dry. He broke the track record, and it was a study in precision driving. So you can do it. You've just got to be incredibly precise to be able to go out and get after it. I hope that third session is a little bit drier, so that some of the guys that were maybe just a tick off, somebody in that top 5 that had a little bit of an issue, still have that to shoot for. Remember, you can still get a wet track record. You don't get the point for it, but it is recorded, and you are listed as a track record holder with a wet track record as well. So there's motivation here.
There certainly is. And the other thing is, it's not actively raining right now.
No.
But the problem is that there's no real sun to dry anything out. So the track is going to dry. It's just going to take a longer time than if it was sunny and bright here this morning at Watkins Glen. But again, the puddles are a little bit less than they were this morning. And it's certainly not that much less treacherous, but it's a little bit less than it was this morning.
It's a little more predictable at this stage, I think. And the one thing that is helping big time is we've got a stout breeze. It is a tailwind down the front straight, a headwind going up through the S's. So that helps, certainly, especially if you don't have sun out there. That breeze will help get the track dried a little bit faster. So it makes it kind of miserable, you know, to be standing out in the cold right now. But there are some upsides to it. And, you know, getting back to, you're always, part of being fast in a car, period, is you have to anticipate, right? You have to be thinking ahead just a little bit. But the other side of it is, in the wet, anticipation of what's coming becomes all the more critical, and that is fueled by track knowledge. And you come up to a spot, as I said, there could be this little, over through the S's over there's this little spot where there could be this little mini rivulet that runs through, where you might, in that part of the track in the dry, be pretty well turned in and hard going. Well, in the wet, you've got to remember that's there, so as you set up for it, you straighten the wheel for just a second to get through there cleanly. You spot these little areas of the track. You talked about the exit now of the bus stop where that patch is, where it's probably a little more slick. You know, you may normally have come through there and just already been really throwing it into that turn. Well, you come out, you straight line across that a little bit. All these little things that you have to be playing with in your head. And we've talked a lot about, you know, what makes a great driver, being able to live at the limit, you know, that kind of thing. Well, to me, in this day and age, in particular, with all of the electronics on the cars and then everything that you still have to deal with in driving, what separates now a really good driver from a truly great driver, as much as just raw talent, is bandwidth.
Yep.
You've got to be brilliant because you're a microprocessor basically now in a car making massive decisions, and you're doing it at speeds of, in the dry 150 miles an hour, in the wet with more treacherous conditions 100 miles an hour, and you better be making the right decisions.
Certainly. There's another look at our Street GT top 5 as they came in as of yesterday. Now remember that this is taking the driver's best lap of the weekend and displaying it to you. Ido Waxman at the top of the board at 2:01.109. He is on track. Just defending. Jackie Ding, Andy Volkel, Magnussen, and Kubiak, the rest of your top 5, and it's about a half-second back from Kubiak to Arteat. I have not seen Arteat on track at all, so Kubiak, while running defensively here, he's not going to run a 2:06.8 in this weather, but just getting some laps to practice for that podium sprint later today, or maybe for qualifying 3 if the conditions are similar.
And the track is better. There's no question. I mean, now I was just looking at some comparative times, and Jackie Ding is a guy you can always reference because he goes out and he just drives. He's very talented. He's got that processing ability that we talk about, and he's now only 20 seconds off where he ran in that session yesterday. So the track is improving because earlier we were seeing times that were 40 seconds off because it was absolutely a wash. But you can see here, even the exit of 9 there, you can see that you can run a little wider than we were able to because that track is starting to disperse the water better, and there's no additional water coming down to replace it. So we're getting a little wider line out there, and if this breeze keeps up and the rain stays away, and we got the Touring Cup race coming, and we've got drifting coming. Who knows? We might have a track that's got some speed in it.
We certainly could. I did see a photo just now of how that Tesla found its way into the wall. It was at turn 6, and it was the left side was up on the tire wall, so it got in there pretty good. And that's a corner that I expected to be more treacherous.
Somebody off right there at the exit of 9.
Oh.
Didn't get into anything. It's backing it up already, I can see. And just did what we talked about. Got up, straddled that curb, and I think.
Oh, right there, yeah.
Yeah, I think
was that Kubiak?
It could be. I think he saw that the curb was ending, and he was into the grass, and he tried to get it back on track, and it just snapped a little bit, but he didn't. It was a long shot, but I don't think he got into that barrier.
Well, let's see what the car looks like when it rolls around turn number 9 and heads up the hill here. And again, turn 6 is an area I expected to honestly be more treacherous than it has been, but I think everyone has a healthy respect for that particular corner. And yes, it was Kubiak in the 363, unless I'm reading incorrectly.
I think you're right.
And then here is the 71. That's Horn in the 8th position as of yesterday, and just shy. I mean, he's a second off of being in. And I mean, this is the beauty of this format is had we had dry, this would have been a really entertaining fight. Just the challenge is that was the one session they got yesterday that was going to be quick, and these other ones they're going to have to fight through a little bit.
And this is just a nice looking car. This Chevrolet Camaro, obviously, just great performance in these cars. And one of those sort of retro throwback looks. And I've always thought that the Camaros they're just mean looking hot rods.
And another great value for performance, just like the Corvette. And the Camaro, in some ways, I think is probably a better car than a Corvette when it comes to some of the performance characteristics. But the one thing it doesn't have is a lot of visibility, and that was never a strong point of that car. Here's the 364, another C6 Corvette on track, and that's Hendricks behind the wheel, 10th overall coming into this session. Up the hill
at a 2:08 right now, and in this session, he's still pretty far off. You can see he's being relatively tentative out there, not pushing it at all. Curious what Waxman's best lap, a 2:36. Look at Ding. Jackie Ding now is under 2:30 though.
Okay.
He's down at a 2:28. So, and you look at his time at 2:05. So he's getting after it.
That's certainly getting closer.
Yeah, I like to see that. And I mean, that's the thing here. Waxman's time, you throw that out. Look at Ding's 2:05.5, and you go all the way back to what, 9th Bullfus at a 2:08.1. I mean, that's you're covered there by less than 3 seconds on a huge clump of cars. This is one of the it always has been one of the most competitive of the NOS Energy Track Battle Championship classes.
And this is a huge field for this particular class. I think, again, 21 cars, or actually more than that, took times here this weekend. Typically, we'll see 10, 12, 14 cars in this class. 23 took times here. That's a lot of cars in the Street GT category, and only 5 can move on and advance to that podium sprint session later today.
And I think the one thing that we should clarify for people that are just watching maybe the first time, and we're talking about the podium sprint or the top 5 at the end of the 3 qualifying sessions go into the podium sprint. Well, yes, that's to determine the top 5 in class, the top 5 in points, but you can get a track record in any session. But the other part of it is 6th on back is still set by every one of these sessions. So somebody that did have an issue in the first session, and there's somebody in front of them that had another issue of their own, you can still leapfrog and move around here. It's not like at the end of the 3 qualifying sessions, 6th on back doesn't matter.
Right.
They're still, their points, positions. If you're looking at the championship, or you're looking at, I want to show friends, family, sponsors, a top 10, you can still do that.
And this is one of those drivers that could do that. This is Smolin in the 373 car. He's down at the bottom of the order with not really a representative lap from yesterday, and getting some laps now, and he has put one on the board at this stage, and you see a 2:58.527. But if he can find some time there closer to what Jackie has run in the 2:30s, he could jump up a couple of spots at least, and that would put him in a little bit better position for the end of the weekend. But and now, Greg, remember just a couple of minutes ago, about half an hour ago, how shiny the edges of the track are. You can still see it on the entrance to the bus stop there on the far left, but slowly this track is coming back.
It is. And that big puddle that was right there just to the right as he exited that second flick to the left there, that's minimizing. You can see that the line is starting to spread a little bit more. That's all indicative of the fact that that this track is starting to improve. It's still damp. You can still see the spray coming off of the tires, but it's nowhere near what it was. And let me look at the run from the toe to the heel. There is that line there where that shine is abating. And that means that the track's starting to grip up just a bit.
It's not going to ever get dry today, but I think it's going to get pretty close to damp versus wet. And I think we're kind of starting to enter that region at this point as the standing water starts to go away.
And that first session yesterday was damp. It wasn't
damp.
dry. So, I mean, if we can get to that level of track condition, we game on here.
I would say so. And this group is probably going to be checkered here pretty shortly if they're not already, and that would leave just the unlimited cars. So again, we're on a little bit of a delay from our initial schedule. That will push GLTC back about 10-15 minutes. It was scheduled to go, believe it, just after the top of the hour. And we're going to be back just a little bit as the Track Mod and Unlimited group gets lined up there on the pit lane and gets themselves ready to go. So Street GT finishing up here for the GRIDLIFE NOS Energy Track Battle Championship Qualifying 2. And there's a look at the grid, the 210, the 449, the 316, all track mod cars, and Subarus in shot. And again, all-wheel drive, that'll be helpful in conditions like this, just to make sure you've got grip to continue accelerating out of corners. And you see Jackie Ding way at the back of that shot, checking tire pressures and things as he pulls the M2 off track.
So this next group, this is the track, the cars. If you haven't seen this before or you weren't watching yesterday, these are the cars where you'll see some super aggressive Aero on these machines getting ready to come out. They have immense power in many of these machines. All of that is going to be mitigated a bit, obviously, by the conditions out there right now. But these are the cars that are, as the name implies, we're talking unlimited mods. Track mods is only slightly more limited than unlimited, so you can really, the envelope is open. As Kyle put it the other day, for unlimited and even track mod, the rule book's pretty thin.
There's not a lot to it. I mean, at that point, it's really just a safety related, at least for unlimited. As far as the track mod rule sets goes, there's kind of 2 paths you can take in track mod. The class used to be called track modified, and now it is technically called track modern, which is designed for kind of modern supercars and things of the sort. But you can basically there's a pick your own path in the rule set under the track modern rules. You can either go one way and run kind of modern supercars a la the McLaren 720S,
right,
or you can go the other route and go kind of the track modified route and build out a high aero, less expensive car, and that's kind of the route that we see a lot of drivers continue to take in this category. So you get kind of an interesting mix of cars, GT2 RSs and McLaren 720s, and then you get crazy Subarus with Aero and all these other cars that kind of slot in. Chris Boersma's Honda Civic that has 700-something horsepower,
yeah,
from his Turbo 4. So you get an interesting mix of cars all in this. I do see Eric Catil on pit lane. I wonder if this is a hardship lap related thing here.
Yeah, and he had a really good run in the Touring Cup yesterday, so I'm not sure what the issue. May have found something after the race. There were a number of the competitors in Touring Cup, but that had little niggling things they were dealing with most of the day yesterday.
Especially in the rain, electronics in particular can give you a bit of a headache.
Talk about a black art.
Yeah. He's going to slot himself right into the grid for track mod, it looks like.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I suppose this is how they're going to get him gridded, but he's not quite ready for the race just yet. He will grid P5, unless he just didn't get the memo that we're a little on a delay, but I don't imagine Eric Catil would make that mistake.
Yeah.
So
yeah, he's a pretty savvy guy. Former champion of GRIDLIFE Touring Cup. So.
Or, you know what, the other thing he could be doing is going to grid in his grid spot, and then once these guys go, he'll just sit there and hang out.
Sit there and wait. That's a possibility, too.
I see Emil Tapp doing this similar thing here. So if Emil slots into grid stall 8, that could be what he's doing.
Kind of looks like it, yeah. It'll be interesting to see how many of the Unlimited and track mod cars head out on this right now. Obviously, Unlimited did not have a lot of takers yesterday, so we'll see what happens in that category. But again, if there's any chance that this podium sprint could be run in the wet later today, and there is a pretty good chance of that from everything we've seen, probably not a bad idea to get out there and drive around a little bit. Even if you don't do it at really serious speed, to at least drive the track, and as I said, make those mental notes about, okay, where there's a little bit of puddling here, don't get near that curb because there's a puddle right at the base, et cetera, all those things. Just process them, so when you get out, if you do the podium sprint and it's wet, you've already got that little bit of data built up.
Well, while we wait for the launch of our Unlimited and Track Mod group, we're going to step away for a quick break. We'll be right back with the continuation of GRIDLIFE NOS Energy Track Battle Championship Qualifying 2. We'll be back in a moment.
Enthusiast choice for ultra-high performance. Engineered for predictable handling and stability, the RT660 provides maximum traction both on and off the track. Your competitive edge has arrived with the Falcon Zenith RT660.
Owning a car can be expensive. It can also be confusing. What? And when things don't go right, there's no doubt it could be frustrating. But it can also be a lot of fun. And for those reasons, FCP Aero exists. Check this out. Do you and your car a favor and head over to fcpaero.com to learn more.
Did you energize yet today? Time to NOS up. Get after it.
Hi, I'm Chris Forsberg, and when it comes to classics and high-performance cars, I only trust America's #1 racing oil, Valvoline VR1. It's built on Valvoline's long legacy in racing, so I can continue to build my own. With 2 times more zinc than the industry standard, VR1's high-performance formula is tested on the track and trusted on the road to ensure your engine is protected from metal-to-metal contact. And I use it so much, I even got my car on the bottle. That's why whether I'm racing or cruising, I protect everything I drive with Valvoline. Valvoline, trusted for over 150 years.
The clouds are slowly lifting here at Watkins Glen International on a Saturday morning that has been cool and dreary. I'm Kyle Heyer, joined by Greg Kramer for the continuation of Grid Life at the Glen. NOS Energy Track Battle Championship qualifying 2 continues here. Track Mod and Unlimited taking to the racetrack now.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens here. These are the cars that have the really huge horsepower, and as the names imply, pretty modified profiles on these cars. Lots of Aero. We talked about it before. Do you have enough speed to get into the Aero and then be able to do something with it? They certainly are capable of it. It's just a matter of if they're comfortable doing it, and it's going to be fun to see. Obviously, in the damp, massive horsepower, especially if the only thing you've got regulating it is your right foot. It's a bit of a tightrope act.
It certainly is. And I talked to Jason Kanakary after the session yesterday. Yeah. So he was in the McLaren 720S, and he basically told me that with the tires he had on, he was not going to go anywhere. Understeer horribly, just could not get a representative lap. He went to try to go find a different set of tires locally, but I did not see him on the grid here. So I'm not sure if he's going to go out in this session in particular. But again, the conditions are challenging right now. They're a little bit slippery, a little bit slidey, especially on the painted surfaces. Yeah. All morning we've seen a couple incidents so far today. It is treacherous out there, and again, these cars have a little bit of Aero to lean on, Greg, but it's not magic. It's not going to stick you to the road when you otherwise wouldn't stick.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you still have to have mechanical grip, and that's just basically the tires, the suspension working in concert with the pavement. You got to start there, and if you don't, you can add Aero on it, but again, if you can't get into the Aero, then your car is not going to be fast at all. So it's going to be an interesting study to see what plays out here. But again, anybody that is already into that podium sprint, and with the distinct possibility, not necessarily absolute, but a possibility, that podium sprint could be held in at least damp conditions, if not downright wet, I'd be out there, and I was just talking about it, driving, not necessarily even 0.8, but get out there, drive a few laps at a relative pace where you can feel what's slick, what's not, where you need to be, where you need to avoid, all of those sort of things, and see if you can just have that data in your head. So if you do come out for the podium sprint where you get 1 out lap and then 2 laps on the clock, best of those 2 determines where you finish in the podium sprint, and it's by yourself. And so if you come out and you've never been on this track in the wet, you're going to really struggle. So at least get out, just drive around a little bit, just process some of that data, and you don't have to go super hard here, but just get some level of knowledge of this track in the damp.
So, Unlimited and Track Mod on track now, heading up the hill again. We don't really expect to see much, if any, improvement. However, I will say that by the time we got to this session yesterday, it was about as bad as it got yesterday, other than late in the GLTC race. So I suppose it is possible we could see a lap time improve for a driver or 2.
I think so, and I'm, in a couple of these categories, the cars that were on the bubble in 5th, in terms of that advanced category, they weren't running very fast laps. I mean, they were struggling for whatever reason out there. So it's not outside of the realm of any possibility that, as you said, somebody could not only improve their time, but they might be able to put in a time that might sneak them back into that advanced category in these 2, just because of these are just tricky, fidgety cars to start with, and if you were dealing with an issue and then it was damp out there, there were a few cars that were a lot farther down in terms of lap time than I would have expected in these conditions. So there's still some possibilities.
Down into the toe of the boot, you get that compression heading up the hill, and then you accelerate down towards turn number 80, and we're going to keep an eye on, we're still untangling some stuff in the back end here with the race group changes from Sunday Cup and Club TR kind of having ripple effect down the line. So we'll let you know if anybody improves, but I'm not expecting a lot of drivers to improve, so we'll keep an eye on it for you. As far as yesterday, the fastest lap run by a Track Mod or Unlimited car was a 2:13.517 by Scott Heckert in the Unlimited class Chevy Impala, which is not what it sounds like. It's the NASCAR Cannon Pro Series car. That was a little bit of a big slide there for, I think that is the 449 of Colin Fitzgerald. Yes, indeed it is. and certainly got a little sideways out of 9, Greg, but hammer down and all-wheel drive, Subaru did the rest.
Exactly, but you got evidence there, like we were talking about traction control and ABS, all-wheel drive. Doesn't mean you're not going to go sideways if you exceed the grip quotient out there. And it's just a little bit easier to drive it, and you can get to that edge, you can exceed it a little bit and have a better chance of reining it in. Behind him here comes a car that is a TCR category Audi, and it's a car that's designed with a lot of aero in mind, and so there are times, even though it's front drive, I've been told that at least the initial run of these TCR cars, they weren't great even as front-wheel drive cars in the wet because they were so aero dependent. They've evolved and they've become a little bit better in the damp as they've worked on that absolutely key mechanical grip, because in the wet, mechanical grip is your friend.
Look at him rocketing down the This is such a cool shot as they come through the S's. Up to 130 miles an hour, maybe a little bit beyond that here in these conditions. Rockwell just ran a 229.849. His best was a 217 yesterday, so still a little ways off from the conditions that we saw in the Unlimited and Track Mod session. But working his way around and into the carousel. Now, I guess the one thing that you do have here, Greg, is that this is really a purpose-built race car, so there are advantages of that and the suspension geometry and that sort of thing. But there are some challenges, too. Stiffly sprung, where that you might want a little bit of a softer setup here, and you'll make any damper changes you can try to make. But fundamentally, it's built to be very, very stiff and not that compliant versus, the street GT cars we saw that are kind of floaty and weight transfer and might have a little bit more weight to throw around. You know,
back in the day when you had a car set up in the dry and then it was wet, you would go in and just disconnect. Ooh, we had somebody spin right down the middle of 6.
Yep.
Looks like they're going again. You would just disconnect the sway bars or the anti-roll bars in the car so that car would, suddenly get really sideways and swing around and everything, and that would help, as we've talked about at some length here, with that weight transfer, to get that weight to plant on those outside tires and give you that little bit of extra grip. Nowadays, a lot of these cars, it isn't that easy to do that, and the like. You can still try it. You can soften up your tire pressures a little bit. There are things you can do, but in these purpose-built race cars, sometimes it's a little more difficult to just disconnect things and make them just all, lots of roll angle and soft and compliant. 2:14.8 for Meadows out there.
That was, again, these are yesterday's times that we're seeing. And again, so that was the best time we saw in track mod, and Fitzgerald is on track right now, so he'll give us the best idea of where the lap times are now versus yesterday. Across the stripe now for Fitzgerald, and it is a 2:30, well, his best a 2:32.3. He ran a 2:16.5 yesterday. So there's your difference.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, Meadows, that 2:14.8, in this session, he's run a 2:30, so that's just only about 15 seconds. And remember, just a couple of sessions back, we were talking about being 20 to 25 seconds off what we had seen from yesterday. So this track is definitely starting to pick up a little bit of pace. Eric Rockwell, he had, I'm trying to remember what his time was from yesterday.
It was a 13, Rockwell's a 2:17.
Yeah, and he's at a 2:25.
Yeah, so he's getting there.
Yeah, this track is starting to get close to where it was yesterday.
And the fastest car in Unlimited yesterday was Scott Heckert in that K&N Pro Series NASCAR Impala, but he is not on track right now because he is in his Corvette, or Jacob Bodenauer's Corvette, to get ready for GLTC here in a couple of minutes, so he won't get a chance. Brad Perkins, did he make a pickup there? A 2:37.222. And yes, he did. So that's an improvement for the number 27. They were making some changes last night late in the garage.
Right.
I think they were running into a fueling issue or something of the sort. So there's an example of someone picking it up and putting it in that top 5.
Yeah, and that's critical because that right now would have him in that podium sprint, and he did it in this session. So this is why you go out, you put in laps, because you never know if somebody else may have been having a problem and they weren't able to get their head wrapped around it. You did. And you might be seconds off of where your outright performance in the dry might be, but you don't really care about that. All you want to do is be 5th or better in the combined times, and so that's a great achievement, really, by Perkins.
Yep, and the only driver out right now is Ernestus Pizelis in the 338 car. He is on track at the moment, but his best time is a 2:46.713, so he's not far off from where he was, but needs a 2:37.222 to advance.
Yeah, he's got to find a pretty big chunk of time to find in this the short of a run session here. And again, looking down toward the boot, that area of the track out there, you can see that big stripe right down the middle of the track where that groove is starting to appear just a little bit. And right about the middle of that, right where that car is now, if you're looking at this shot off to the right, there's a hillside. And from up there, it's one of the best viewing points of any racetrack anywhere, because you see all the way from the toe to the heel, and you see him coming down through the laces. And I too am impressed that that turn 6, with the exception of our one Tesla, that they've been very respectful of that piece of track, because in these conditions, it will bite.
It's just deceptive how tight it is,
Yeah.
and once you figure it out, once you've been here a couple times, you get used to that, but it still falls away. There's not a lot of runoff there, or any. It's just a challenging corner, and it's probably one that people don't list as the tricky one here, but I think more people should list it as the tricky one here. It really is a problem spot. I also think that you're talking about vantage points. The inside of the boot, looking down at turn 6 when you're kind of sitting there, that's another great spot.
Absolutely it is.
And here's Jason Kanakary, by the way, on track. He could go a little quicker now that he's got tires that are hopefully a little bit better for him. You see the rear wing pop up as he gets on the brakes, a little bit of a release and then back onto the brakes. So still testing the waters here, but we'll see how he does. Needs to improve on a 2:30, 6:34, but he's got it 9 seconds to find, and that might be a challenge.
That could be a big chunk here. Not out of the realm of possibility if he really had bad tires in that dampage session yesterday. If he's got much better tires on, it could be something. And I think those cars also have a wet setting where that wing will stay up a little bit longer, and you can use that because, you know, up through the S's normally that wing would just flatten out because you're just full acceleration and you don't want drag. In the wet, you might want that wing to be a little bit more effective, and I believe that they do have a wet setting in there. But it's pretty cool technology, isn't it, to have that movable aerodynamic device built in as from the factory in these supercars, and that just gets up there and just helps plant the back of these cars. And again, rear-wheel drive.
Yep, and he's still pretty tentative looking through the carousel, but we saw him try to push yesterday, and it just did not steer. It did not stop. It did not accelerate. Didn't do much of anything.
Yep.
And that came down to really the tire that he had on the car. So as he heads down into turn 6 and towards turn 7, still looking a little tentative and just working up to it. But again, there's still another session, so this is a good one for him to kind of figure it out and then attack next time out.
Absolutely. You learn now and attack later. And we just had a really nice shot there of turn 6. And you don't see how the significant elevation drop, but you can see how long you're in that turn. And it falls away, and it's just one of those corners where we've talked about it a lot, where you really need to be patient. You turn into that corner with as much speed as it'll take going in, but then the natural tendency is you get to the apex and you want to go to throttle, right? And you do that there because it's falling down the hill and it's off camber. The car will push. In other words, the front end will try and push and not turn. And it's one of those corners where you have to be very, very patient until you get it squared up a little bit more to be able to go to throttle. And that's where it'll catch out a lot of competitors.
There's Brad Perkins working his way through turn 10, one of the drivers that did improve on his lap and put him 5th fastest in the unlimited category and into the podium sprint. Here he comes up onto the front straightaway in that unlimited class BMW and past the front straightaway, and he's cooking now. He's on it, on power. Down into turn 1, brake lights on, and roughly on the racing line here. You don't really have a lot of options other than kind of riding the rim down through turn 1. It narrows up so much. You see him wiggle there a little bit and throw the hand out the window to give a point by back to Jason here as Kanakary heads up the hill in the 720S.
Yeah, and it's interesting that, and again, it's that mental game that we talked about earlier, that it's offline where you'll find the grip, and you can see he came down there and then turned in on the line. And it's just and he was off to the right coming down the hill, then turned onto the normal line where the grip tends to be less. And if you're going to run that middle line, then you want to ease and go wide around the corner. When I was racing, I found it to be a little bit better for me because you weren't making that second adjustment as the checkered flag comes out. Is I'd stay down the straight on the normal line, and when I get to the corner, I'd brake just a little sooner, right, to get the car slowed and settled, and then just cross the turn-in point and wait and get that grip and use the outside. But you have to, have some experience and understanding and be able to wrap your mind around that. And I'm sure you will.
Certainly is. Let's going to wrap up the TrackBot and Unlimited qualifying tour. We're going to step away for a couple of minutes and be right back with GridLife Touring Cup race number 2 action. Stick with us here on GridLife Live. We'll be right back.